Hi everybody, welcome to Live Blogger. In this tutorial series, we have been creating a custom dropdown using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So this is how it looks. We can see that we have this dropdown, and if I click on that, we have all the options displayed over here. And we can select any of these options and the option will be displayed over here. And we can also search for the options over here. So if I just type USD, we can see that the search results are displayed over here as the options. And if I click outside, we can see that the options disappear. Now in the previous video, we created these two drop downs over here, and we have the functionalities added, like when we click on any of these options, they are displayed over here. So we have the same functionality for the second drop down as well. Now in this video, let's add the remaining functionalities, like when we click outside this drop down, the options should disappear. And we also need to add the search functionality. So right now we don't have the search functionality. So we will do all of that in this video. Let's get started. Right, here's our source code, and the first thing we will do is when we open this second dropdown, and now if we open this first dropdown, we can see that both the options are displayed over here. So the options of the second dropdown and also the options of the first dropdown are displayed over here. So what we need to do is when we click on one of these options, the other option should disappear. So for that, here we can see that we are adding a class called active to the options to display it. So if you go to the main.js file, here let's take a look at the event listener. So here we can see for the option event listener, we are removing the active class. So when we click on any of these options, this option container disappears. And here for the add event listeners function, here we can see that when we click on this currency input, we are adding a class of active to the options. Right now, let's go ahead and add some code to this currency input event listener. So right now we are just executing these lines of code. So we are removing the flag from here, and then we are displaying this options division, and then we are adding this padding left, and we are setting the currency value to blank. Now let's go ahead and add some code over here. So let's add an if condition. So here let's type if, and let's check whether the ID is from or to. So let's type from over here. So if the ID is from, which means that if we are clicking on this from drop down over here, then we need to add some code. So we need to first of all remove the active class from the second drop down. So first of all, let's go ahead and reference the other drop down, which has this ID of 2. So let's type const, and let's call it to drop down, and let's set it equal to document dot query selector, and here let's type hash to options. So this will select the options inside the to drop down, so the second one over here, and we need to remove the active class from this options. So I'll just rename this to drop down options, and here let's type to drop down options dot class list dot remove active. And now here let's add an else if, and let's type id equals 2. So now we are checking whether we are opening the second drop down, which has an ID of 2. And here let's type const from drop down options. I'll just copy these two lines of code, and let's paste it over here. And here instead of 2, let's type from, and here also let's type from, and here also we need to type from. Right now, if you go back to our website, and if I click on this input field, here we have the options displayed. But if I click on the first input field, the second options now disappear. But if you go ahead and select one of these options, here we can see that the second drop down input field has no data over here. So let's fill this data. So let's go ahead and let's call this function called set input values. And here we can see we have created this function called set input values, and in that we are setting the currency, flag and code. So let's go ahead and provide these options over here. But here we can see we don't have any information about those values. So for that, I'll just create an object, and I'll just store the current values over here. So here, let's create an object, and let's call it current values. And here let's type from currency, and let's set the from currency to a default value of USD -US dollar. And then let's go ahead and type from flag, and let's set it equal to the US flag. So if we go to the index.html file, here we can see we have the link. So let's copy this and let's paste it over here. And then we need to have the from code, and let's set it to USD. And then let's go ahead and add the values of the to dropdown. So let's tap to currency, and let's set it as a default value of EUR, euro. And then for the country flag, let's type to flag, and I'll just copy this and let's paste it over here, and let's change this to EU. And then lastly we need to have to code, and let's set it to EUR. Right now let's create a function to update our values. So we will update these input fields with the values from this current values object. So for that I'll just create a function, and I'll just call it update values. And here we just simply go ahead and call this function called set input values, and here we will pass the current values inside this current values object. So here first of all let's add it for the from dropdown. So let's type currency values, which is the name of the object, dot from currency. And the next thing we need to pass is the flag. So let's type current values dot from flag, and let's type current values dot from code. And then we also need to pass the ID. So the ID is from. Right now let's type set input values, and let's do the same for the to dropdown. So let's type current values dot to currency, current values dot to flag, current values dot to code, and the ID is 2. Right now let's go to the init function which we created. So here we have this function called init, and we are calling it at the beginning. So here let's go ahead and call the function which is update values. And now if you go back, here we can see that the second dropdown has this value of euros, because if you scroll up, here we can see that the current value of the to dropdown is set to euro. So the values are being updated correctly. Right now let's go to the add event listeners function, and here we can see that we have added these if conditions over here. If you go back and if I click on this dropdown and if I click over here, now the problem was that this dropdown is blank. So let's go ahead and here in this set input values, let's pass the current values of 2. So let's type current values dot to currency, current values dot to flag, current values dot to code, and here let's type 2 as the ID. So let's copy the same thing and let's call the function over here, and here we need to change to from. Right now let's go back, and now if we click on this input field, we have the options displayed over here. Now if we click on the first input field, we have the other options displayed over here. And now if we select any of these, now we can see that we don't have this blank input field. We have the current value displayed over here. Now we can go ahead and select another option. Now if we go ahead and click on the first input field and let's go back, now we can see that it is set back to euro because the object is not being updated when we change these values. So when we click on any of these options, the current values object should also be updated. So it is always set to these values. So let's go ahead and update these values when we click on these options. So for that, let's scroll down and let's see where is the code for the event listener of the option. Right here we can see we have this function called create option, and if you scroll down, here we have the event listener for the option. And right now the only thing we are doing is removing the active class from the options, and we are setting the input values to the values that we need. Right now let's go ahead and add an if condition, and let's check whether the ID is from. And if the ID is from, then we need to type current values dot from currency, and we need to set it to the currency text which we have over here. So let's type currency text, and then let's type current values dot from flag, and let's set it to the flag image source, which is flag image dot src. So let's type flag image dot src, and then let's type current values dot from code, and let's set it to the code. So here we have this code, so let's add that over here. Let's tap code. Right now let's go ahead and add an else if, and let's tap if the ID is 2. Then we need to do all of this for the current values, to currency, to flag, and to code. So let's copy these 3 lines of code and let's paste it over here. And here, instead of from, we need to change these to 2. Right now let's also create a test button to test whether we have the correct current values stored. So here, let's go to the HTML file, and below this I'll just create a division, and let's type test values, and let's open the console, and let's go back and let's go to the main.js file, and here let's go ahead and let's type const, and let's name it test button equals document.querySelector, and let's give it a class of test. Now we are doing this just to test whether we have the correct values added to the object. So let's tap test. Right now let's add an event listener to this. So let's scroll down and let's go after this current values object, and let's tap test button dot add event listener. Click, and here let's go ahead and display the current values object. So let's tap console.log current values, and let's type current values over here. So now whenever we click on this test values button, we should have the values displayed over here. So let's click on it, and here we can see we have the current values displayed. So the from currency is set to USD, and the from flag set to US flag, and the from code is set to USD, and the to currency is set to Euro, and the flag and the code is also set. But now let's go ahead and change this first drop down. So let's select, for example, let's select Canadian dollar, and now let's click on test values, and now we can see that the first drop down is set to the Canadian dollar and the second one is set to Euro. So let's go ahead and change the second value. So for this one I'll just change this to this value right here, New Zealand dollar, and now if we click on test values, we can see that the first one is set to Canadian dollar and the second one is set to New Zealand dollar. So now the current values object is being updated correctly. So now let's go ahead and see whether we have any problems when we click on this and when we click on the other option. And now if we select any of this, we can see that the New Zealand dollar is displayed over here. So now we can see that the values are updated correctly. Right now let's add the functionality to hide these options when we click outside the drop down. So right now if we click outside the drop down, nothing happens. So let's go back and let's add that functionality. So here let's scroll down and let's add an event listener to the document. So let's tap document.add event listener, and here let's tap click, and here we'll get some values. I'll just call it E, and here let's go ahead and first of all let's reference the elements that we need. So we need to have reference of the from drop down, the to drop down, and also the from options which we have over here, and the two options which we have over here. So let's reference these 4 elements. I'll just tap const from equals document.querySelector from, and then we have const to equals document.querySelector to, and let's type const from options equals document.querySelector from options, and then we need to type const to options equals document.querySelector to options. Right now let's add an if condition, and let's type e.target is not equal to from. So right now we are checking whether the clicked element is not from, and we need to do that for all the other elements. So let's type ampersand e.target is not equal to, and let's type ampersand. Right now we need to type exclamation from dot contains, and here we need to add e.target. And we need to do the same for to. So let's type ampersand exclamation to dot contains e.target. So we are basically checking whether the position that we click is inside the drop down and also the options of the drop down. And then lastly you have to type ampersand exclamation to options dot contains e.target, and ampersand exclamation from options dot contains e.target. Now if this condition is satisfied, then we need to remove the active class from the drop downs. So let's type two options dot class list dot remove active, and we need to do the same for from options dot class list dot remove active. And when we remove the active class, we'll also update the values. So here we have this function which we just created called update values, which sets the values to the current values inside the input field. So let's call that function over here. I'll just type update values. Right now let's go back to our website and let's click on this input field. Right now let's click outside, and now we can see that the options disappear. So let's select another option, and now if we click outside, we can see that it is working alright. Let's click on the first input field, and here we have the options. Let's click outside and the options disappear. So it is working alright. So now let's go ahead and add the functionality of search. Now for the search, we need to look for an event listener called input for this input field. So here in this function called add event listeners, let's type currency input dot add event listener, and let's add an event listener for input. Now whenever we type something over here, this event listener will be fired. Now for searching, we will create a function called filter options. Now here in this function, we'll pass the ID and all the options. So let's type const all options equals dropdown dot query selector all, and here let's type option. So here we can see we have these divisions with the class of option for all these options. So we are selecting all these options and we are storing it inside all options, and let's pass that over here. Right now let's create this filter options division. So here let's go ahead and type const filter options, and here we get the ID and all options. Now here let's go ahead and reference the dropdown. So let's type const dropdown equals document dot query selector, and here let's type backticks hash dollar symbol curly braces, and let's type ID. So we are selecting the correct dropdown with the ID that we get from this function, and then let's type const currency input equals dropdown dot query selector currency input. Right now let's go ahead and get the value that we have inside this currency input. So let's type const, and let's call it search term equals currency input dot value, and I'll just change this to lowercase so that it can be easy for us to check the values. Right now let's loop through all these options. So let's type all options dot for each, and for each of the option I'll just call it option, and let's create an arrow function. And here first of all we need to get the text content of the option. So here we can see the text content is USD US dollar. So we need to search whether the search term is matching with any of these words. So let's type const currency text, and let's set it equal to option dot text content, and let's set this to lowercase as well. Right now let's add an if condition, and here let's type currency text, and we need to see whether the currency text includes the search term, and if it is true, then we will type option dot style dot display, and I'll just set it to flex. And if it is not true, then we will set the option style display to none. And now if we search for something over here, we can see that it is working alright. So let's select one of these currencies, and now we can see that Indian rupee is being selected. So if we click on this input field, now we have this problem over here because we have the previous search results displayed over here. So for that, what we need to do is when we click on this input field, we need to reset this search term. So let's go back, and if you scroll up, here we can see that we are adding this event listener for the currency input with this input event. But here we also have this click event. So when we click on this input field, we will call the filter options function as well. So let's copy this line of code, and let's scroll down, and here after these lines of code, let's see whether all options is available, and if it is available, then let's go ahead and paste this line of code. But now let's go back and now let's search for something over here. So let's type CAD and let's click on this. Now if we click on this input field once again, we can see that the previous search term was reset, so everything is working all right. And here also the search results are being displayed correctly. And let's click on test values, and we have the correct values displayed over here. And with that, we have completed creating this custom dropdown using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Now in the next video, I'll show you how to integrate this custom dropdown to the currency converter that we created earlier. So we had created this currency converter in one of the previous videos, and here we are using the native dropdown in HTML. Now in the next video, I'll show you how to replace this dropdown with the custom dropdown that we created over here. So we will do that in the next video. Right, so that's basically it for this video. If you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.